Got it.
So I'll just start with a couple slides, and then I'll move into a demonstration in QGIS so we can look at this. And I'll just introduce myself briefly. I did just move to Denmark 14 months ago from the United States. I was living in a state called New Mexico in the Southwest. I now work for Septima, which is based in Copenhagen. And so we are a largely open source consulting company. So I do a mix of spatial analysis and cartography and teaching. I'm really interested in data visualization. I do quite a bit of that, and have a course that I've developed several years ago that I keep updating with new features in the courses, data visualization with QGIS. So I'm very interested in that realm of GIS. And I've also written a number of books on QGIS. So I track the new features of QGIS quite extensively, mainly so I know when to update my books. And actually both of these are going to come out with new editions this spring. Myself and Hans van der Kwast just updated this QGIS for hydrological applications book. And so it's going to be published within a few weeks. And on the left is a Discover QGIS, quite a large book, 400 pages, that gives a really thorough treatment of all the features in QGIS. And these were first published in 2019, and there's been, what now, 9 new versions of QGIS since then. So they're out of date, and this Discover QGIS 3X the next version will be out sometime in the next couple months. And I also have an Esri background. I've been doing GIS for 20 or 25 years. So I started out with Esri software, and kind of became converted to open source in QGIS about 10 years ago, and have been using QGIS ever since. So let me talk about annotation layers. So this was first introduced in terms of the API at QGIS 3.16. So importantly, the actual graphical user interface, the toolbar, was introduced at 3.2.2. So if you have a QGIS project that you develop annotations for, it would the oldest version those will still appear in would be 3.16. You could still open a 3.2.2 project or a 3.2.4 project with annotations in 3.16, and those annotations will be there because the underlying API still exists, even though the toolbar doesn't exist in 3.16. So if you open it in an older version of QGIS, they just won't be there. So this is a very new feature, and with most new features in QGIS, there's usually a flurry of development for the first two versions afterwards. So I expect there to be quite a few more enhancements to annotation layers at 3.2.6 and 3.2.8 during this year. One thing about this is it's really more analogous to the ArcMap draw toolbar than annotation feature classes. But this is because the annotations that you create using this are stored in the QGIS XML file. So they're project-based. But importantly, they are geo-referenced to the location that you place them in. And I'll show you how you can work with scale associated with that as well. And really the thinking behind them was to develop them for cartographers. So the idea being that this allows a cartographer to basically mark up maps. So this would be the situation where there's things you want to add to the map, I think, that would be beyond place name labels and things like that. You may want to add some points, lines, or polygons, or some text on a map quickly to enhance the map for things that, you know, wouldn't fit as a label. So this was, I think the thinking behind this was that historically, before this existed, you might need to, if there was one thing you wanted to create, like a label for an ocean or a bay or something like that you didn't have data for, you might just have to create a layer just to symbolize that and create a label there. Or you might actually have to digitize a line or a polygon for that kind of markup. Either that or go into the print composer and add shapes and text to the print composition, but you get the same issue there that you do in ArcMap. If you add something to the print composition, it's not georeferenced. And so if you end up changing the map extent or changing the map scale, you know, those print layout annotations don't move with the map. So they're not really scalable, not very useful. And then QGIS for a long time had speech bubble annotations. There was a kind of on this annotations toolbar, this right-hand one has this little speech bubble tool. And this was basically taken from the original QGIS annotations that has existed for quite a few years, but has been very limited in terms of how you could style and present those speech bubbles. So the idea was to make this simple and easy to use and make them highly configurable. So these new annotations support all the QGIS symbology options. So this includes all the different renderers that QGIS has, including different symbol layer types, layer effects, so they're adding outer glows, shadows, inner glows, things like that. They support blending modes, data-defined override, so you can use expressions in text, for example, that you want to put on the map as an annotation. You can use variables, so you could have project or layer level variables that you use in defining the text. So in terms of renderers, they also support geometry generators, which I briefly was talking about before we got started. So this is a pretty exciting feature that's been in QGIS for quite a while now. But as the QGIS expression engine continues to grow, what you can do with geometry generator keeps growing. And so this is where you can use an expression to change the geometry and the appearance of data sets. So I'll show a little bit of that. These annotations also support all the digitizing functionality that you have in QGIS. So you can use the snapping toolbar to snap annotations to features on the map. If you've used the advanced digitizing panel, you can use that functionality when you're digitizing. So that allows you to enter lengths and angles of vertices, or enable stream digitizing or curves. So all of that is supported with annotations. Stream digitizing. So let's get out of this and get into QGIS, and I can show you how it works. So this is just a simple map I had set up for my part of Denmark here. So I am zoom out. So I think it sounds like you guys are over here somewhere, and this is Copenhagen, and I'm up north of Copenhagen a little bit, about 45 minutes north. And so we can work with this area just to add some annotations with the toolbar. So by default, the annotations are not, the toolbar is not enabled. So simply right click to enable the annotations toolbar, and it appears here. So it includes buttons for adding polygons, lines, markers or points, and text. So for example, if we want to indicate that maybe this is a nice beach area here, we could put a marker there as a marker annotation, and then just choose an icon from your library. This particular one is just using an SVG marker and a simple marker. So any of your symbology that you have currently stored, or any of the symbology types that you work with, can be used with markers. And you'll see that in the layer styling panel here that it's showing this as annotations. So when you first add an annotation to QGIS like this, it is it doesn't show up in the layers panel. It's kind of a hidden layer. And I'll show you in a minute how you can create an actual annotation layer that you can move up and down in the stack. But if you're simply wanting to add a couple annotations to the map, this works quite well, because you can simply click on some areas and add different activities like this in this case. If I want to add a line, it's also simply the same functionality you get when you digitize features. So a left click to start, and left click to keep adding vertices, and then a right click to finish, and you have a line show up. And so you can, of course, change that to any type of line that you would like to use with any of the symbology. For polygons, it's the same as digitizing any other polygon. We can left click to create vertices, and then right click to finish, and you have a polygon of an area. So that's basically how it was designed, to make these very quick and easy to add. And then for text, you can just click on the map where you want the text to go, and type in the text. And there's your text, and then you have all the controls that you would get with a text label in terms of choosing the font, the color. If you have stored text symbols in your symbology manager, you can choose those. You can use label halos. It's a little bigger so you can see it. You can add drop shadows and all of that sort of normal functionality you now get in QGIS. One of the nice things about this is it also supports expressions. So for example, here where I have this text, I could instead insert an expression. So I could go in here and put like now for the now function, and have this text be the current date and time. And I could even, whoops, let me highlight all of that. I could format this. So all the expressions that QGIS comes with can be used with this kind of thing. So I could format date and put in day, month, year. So that the timestamp gets formatted into today's date. So all those expressions can be used, which is quite nice. Yeah, in terms of symbology too, and showing you a little bit about geometry generators, I can select different annotations with this button to the right, modify annotations, and I can, with this, I can move them. I still have a little trouble with, there we go. You can move them, you can change individual vertices. So they are editable once you've completed them. And to show you a nice geometry generator function, I could change this from a simple line to geometry generator. And it's kind of a jagged oval right now, so I could use the smooth function, which takes the geometry and a tolerance. So I'll put in something like 2, and now it has smoothed that line. So that's an example of a nice use of a geometry generator for smoothing things based on a tolerance. And similarly, the wavy line we were talking about, I believe there's now a wavy line symbol in here. Let me make the line a little thicker here. You can see it. So this is this wavy line symbol that now ships with QGIS is using a geometry generator with this wave randomized function that you can set parameters for to change the waviness, the characteristics of that wavy line. That shows you a little bit about some of the things you can do with geometry generators and how you can symbolize these annotations. This button to the far left allows you to focus either on the main annotation layer. So if we go to the properties of this main annotation layer, we can see the extent of the layer and the number of items in it. And the source of this is just the project. So, but you do get some things like scale dependent visibility of this layer, the blending mode. You can choose draw effects for, so these would be applied to all the annotations in this layer. And it tells us that we have 1 polyline, 2 markers, text, and a polygon. So with these, there's nothing we can do to control the drawing order. They are kind of this master annotation symbol layer. But if I, from this annotation management button, I can choose a new annotation layer. And now it shows up in my layers panel. So at this point, I could rename it recreation or something. And so here I have a new annotation layer, and I can start putting things into that. And so for example, here I could, put a cycling icon. And this, since it is tied to this separate layer, you can move it up and down in the stack of layers in your layer panel and control where it goes, what sits above it, what sits below it. And you can turn it off and on. So it's going to behave like a normal layer would from that sense. Another aspect of the annotation layers is that there's a reference scale here. So I could set this, well, if I don't set the reference scale and I zoom out, these will stay at the same size in millimeters that I had specified for them. So this one is 11.4 millimeters. And so that's what they stay no matter what the zoom scale is. But if I go in here and I set the current scale as the reference scale, as I zoom out, you see that cycling symbol stays the same, occupies the same geography as I zoom in and zoom out compared to the other symbols. So I think that can be quite important, especially for text annotation, to control the reference scale that's going to be suitable for. The other benefit of having this be a separate layer for some annotations is that we can incorporate it into map themes. So if we
regarding the reference, when you start working with the map layout, how is the relation there? Is it overwritten by reference scale in the map layout?
Let's see, I do have a map layout open here. So let's experiment with that. If I'm in my map layout and I change the scale, it honors that reference scale for that one that it was set for, whereas the others are going to behave just like they did in the main map canvas.
That's cool. And good can be bad depending on your needs. But it's good that it carries over, I think.
Yeah, yep. You just have to understand how it's going to behave so you can set it up appropriately, I think. Let's see. So if I, with this particular polygon, if I make this a gray fill, like I said, we can do things like control the opacity of that. So all of that kind of symbology, options that you get with regular polygons is going to be honored here. And I was just talking about map themes. So I could go in here and set up, add a map theme, call it all layers. And then I could turn this off and create a map theme that is no annotation. So now if I choose all layers, that one will appear. And if I choose my no annotation, it goes away. So you can use map themes when you have a separate annotation layer. So I think the kind of the default master annotation layer would be probably not for power users. That's probably for more people who are not real power users of QGIS. They just need to add some markup to a map, like if you're a biologist or something. But if you are really setting up a map for production use, I imagine you would be creating these separate annotation layers that you can manage.
Yeah. Another question. These annotation layers, a very common procedure is that we have, of course, feature-linked annotations. So a standard procedure would be to get the data set and label it, whether it be points, lines, polygons, according to some, the properties of the font. And then you can, in S3 world, you create text objects, and then you can have that as a starting point doing, cartographic refining. Would the procedure be similar here, that you would have a source data and use the labeling in QGIS and then convert it to, annotation layers? So you have a rough, as good as it gets with the labeling, and then you can have the final touches of a cartographer for a city, for instance. Would that be the recommended procedure, or are these just not mature enough just yet in QGIS to approach cartographic labeling and designing that way?
Yeah, currently the way it exists today, it doesn't have that functionality to be linked to your features or be data driven like that in any way. But I have a slide that shows the wish list and some of the things that have already been funded for 326. So I can tell you that is on the wish list. And another tool that just came out that's related to this, if you go into the processing toolbox, into the cartography tool set, there is an extract labels tool that just came out with 3.2.4. So this one, if I choose, which layer do I have labeled here? Is it this? Yeah. So if I run this extract labels tool, I guess it does. So you can set your map theme and your map extent. You can choose your map scale. Map scale. And I'll just say this is a temporary layer and run this. It's going to create a layer of my, basically a point layer of my extracted labels. And if I look at the attribute table for this, it has all of the characteristics of my labels. So the label text, the width, height, rotation, font family, font size, italic, bold, underline, font style. So all of that sort of information.
And at the moment, that is stored as an XML in the project file.
This is actually a layer. So it's a temporary layer.
Okay, so patch layer.
But I could say this is a geo package or an Esri shape file, and it's a point layer. So right now it has no, it has no symbols right now, but I can make it a single symbol. And so let me make these a little bit bigger. So it just this layer basically extracted the label points for where those labels have been placed on the map.
It's possibly to relate this background IDs to the source layer then.
Yeah.
Yes.
But there was a feature ID. It's good. It's a good.
This is good news.
So it looks like we are closer than I thought it was.
Yeah, and I assume that you've seen the functionality for manually placing labels or moving labels in QGIS. So if, with this place names layer here that I have labeled, on the labeling toolbar, I can choose to move a label. And so if I want to move this one, it will first ask me for the ID, and let me check to make sure I have a good ID for this layer. Yeah, that looks, I didn't know if I had a unique ID for this layer because I hadn't planned on showing this. But if I click on this, it's going to ask for the unique ID, the feature ID for that layer. And then I can grab this label and move it wherever I want. And this same labeling functionality from this toolbar allows you to say, this label I would like to increase the size of and make it bold.
So if you don't really need an annotation layer to you do kind of simple, quick maps like this, labeling is good enough.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
Just
So
need a labeling that is not you don't have in the data, then the annotation is very nice to have.
Right. So with this functionality, it basically is there because no matter how good you try to tinker with the label placement settings, there's inevitably labels that still are not in the perfect place. And so this allows you to position labels exactly where you want them to be. And then change.
Excuse me, it's still just a label in the QGIS project. It's not a data object.
Correct. So this is just a point layer in QGIS that is being labeled. And but this functionality allows me to customize the position and characteristics of each label. And this is what happens with this is that you may be aware that at QGIS version 3.2, the QGIS project file started being saved as a QGZ file, which is a zipped QGIS project file, and inside is the QGIS file and a QGIS project database. So when you manually place labels like this information gets placed into the project database, which is a spatial light database. And so if I go to the labels for this layer, and I go here to, you can see a lot of these data defined overrides have become active because I moved some of these, I adjusted the font, the size of this. I also adjusted the position. So on the position tab, you'll see that the data defined override for the position of these labels has been activated, and it's being stored in the auxiliary storage of the project. So the reason it asked me initially for the feature ID when I wanted to move a label is because it's basically doing a join without you having to be aware of it. It's storing the characteristics of the label that you change in the project database and joining that to the layer so that these data defined overrides will point to the label position X, label position Y in this auxiliary storage table and so these label positions then are tied to this project. They're since they're stored in the project database. But this was introduced a few years ago, and it makes it really, really easy to manually position and edit labels so that they look exactly as you need them to.
But you can easily add on attributes to if you have the point layer in a database, you can add a label X, label Y, and use that instead of you.
Of course.
So you don't need a project file in that sense. Actually, you can do it straight.
Yes, exactly. That's absolutely right. So if I had a label X, label Y, then for this data defined override, I would just point it to that field that contained those. Yeah. So this is nice. And then, there's been a lot of other things that have been added to QGIS recently, like call outs that can be set up as straight lines, Manhattan lines, curved lines, or balloons. So I could set this up as a curved line. And if I move this Hunistal label out, you see it now as a curved line to the point. So there's a lot of this sort of functionality that has been added in recent editions of QGIS. And the nice thing about these callouts is that you can adjust a lot of parameters of the line, the line style, the amount of curvature that it has, the orientation, clockwise or counterclockwise, the label anchor point. So a lot of different things, and these all have data defined overrides with them as well. So I can actually also move the beginning and ending point of that line if I want to. Say I wanted to point to the end of the label like that. So you can move either end of the label callout line independent from the label text itself.
Yeah, and you can make that individual, but you can also make it for all texts.
Yes.
For some, that's very good. Sometimes you want just one unique, but sometimes you want to have the function on every feature class from a point layer.
Yep. So yeah, that was a little off the topic of this new annotation feature, but I thought it was good to cover since we're just talking about labeling in general.
And how about labels, text labels, yeah, in the annotation toolbar as well, that are curved or stacked?
Not yet. Let's get to this. So this is the wish list for annotation layer. So one of them is to be able to add annotation text on a curved line or text on a Bezier curve. And I spoke to Niall Dawson, who developed this. He's the Australian developer who created this feature. And he's fairly certain this is going to be out by 3.26. We'll see. Another enhancement to this would be to develop an algorithm to export the annotations as standard vector layer features. So that means where I had annotations as lines or polygons, that you could actually export those out as vector features, as PostGIS layers or geopackage layers or what have you, to convert them, because maybe you get to the point where you need those to actually be vector data that you do something with. Right now, the text annotation item itself doesn't have those call outs, but there's another enhancement of this will be create that same call out functionality for the text annotations you create with the annotation toolbar. Right now, you can only select one annotation at a time. And so there's a need to be able to select multiple annotations and change the symbology of those simultaneously. So that's another future plan. Another future plan is to add the capability to be able to copy and paste annotation items between projects, and to be able to copy and paste annotation styles between annotation items, like you can do with GIS layers. You can copy and paste styles between GIS layers in QGIS. So this would be adding that same functionality to these annotations. Create line and polygon annotations using rectangles, circles, and ovals. And I guess this has already been funded and is going to be out in 3.26. So using standard shapes. And then the convert labels to annotations algorithms. This is what we were just talking about. So this is something that is already been identified as a need. So it's only a matter of time until this functionality comes out where you can take the labels for a labeled feature and export that out to an annotation layer. One of the easiest ways at this point to make the annotations independent of the project is to be able to save them out as a QLR file that you could add to different projects. So this is something that's been identified as a fairly low lift for developing that, to be able to make them independent of a project. And then I also ran your use case of, having 5 million annotation features that you would like to be able to work with. And Niall Dawson said that roughly speaking, he thought that would be about 1 to 2 weeks of development time to basically develop the same functionality you have in the Esri environment for annotation feature classes that you could store in a database like PostGIS. And
that would mean that would include if we pay for some that kind of development, that would mean we write a wish list of another functionality as well, or
yeah, I would think you would scope out exactly what it is you need that functionality to do for your workflows.
Yeah, cool.
And then get a quote for that, and then maybe it can be find other users who are interested in that same thing, because I'm sure they exist, and it could be a crowd-funded campaign or something like that, maybe.
It's primarily Neil Dawson that's doing this development.
Yes,
Ah.
yeah. And I don't know if you're aware of him, but he's fast, reasonable, and guaranteed to do a good job. So every time I've worked with him, I've been impressed. So
He's everywhere. And
he's everywhere. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what's coming down the road. And so, yeah, this is Niall Dawson's vision, basically. So, and I think he's definitely open to hearing about other ways that people would like to see this functionality enhanced. So,
you sent an example on, I think, one thing that we draw quite often are things that are a combination of points and lines and icons and text. And maybe if we're talking about that kind of thing, sort of a box with an icon or two icons and a text, a name in it or whatever, that's things that fall within the geometry constructor kind of realm. Would that be right?
yeah, they certainly could, or even maybe just a stacked symbol. So, you know, if we take, you know, this little polygon here, see if I can figure out how to move it. There we go. And we can, there are all these, we can add symbols to this. So we could choose an you know, an SVG fill to this and choose an SVG icon. There we go. Of you know, some kind of, so you can start to combine things in a layer stack. Is there a,
you actually have a geometry generator there as well if you want to do something more complex, because part of what I'm getting at is I mean, if we're not just sort of annotations like this, but linked to a data source, is to be able to read attributes from the layer and use that to decide whether it's red or green or blue, what icon it has, and so on and so on.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, you could definitely, that would be use case for stacking different geometry generators to combine point, line, and polygon symbology on the same feature.
Yeah.
And it would be, I think, fairly achievable.
Have a simple case. It's a road. What do you call it in English?
Road shield.
Road
Oh,
shields. Because now we have different types of icons depending on how many numbers there are, and it's manually sort of. So it would be good to have a dynamically box based on the number of characters or something like that.
Yeah, so that's kind of a, you know, tied to data. So, you know, we could certainly create a marker here, and I don't know if I have any, or I have SVG icons for highway shields, but that becomes a data driven thing. So that would be, well, I guess you'd have to manually create it right now. The way it exists today, you'd have to manually create those and add put the shield on and add the text manually, since none of this is connected to data. But with some of the future enhancements, that should become possible, because the symbology is already there. We just don't have the connection to the data.
But in this case, actual annotation layer is not necessary. Just
No, you can symbolize roads with those kind of symbols now. It's quite easy. So I don't know if I have a data set here that will be interesting. Don't think these have route numbers in them. But you know, I could go in here and add a highway shield. And point it to just max speed, so I have a number in there, and then make these tweak some of the parameters so that the merge connected lines to avoid duplicates. And now I'm starting to get little highway shields. I chose speed limit and some of, you know, so this is not a great use case, but when you're using those, they do have on the background labeling tab where you choose which SVG marker you want to use. You can choose the size of that and have it be buffered against the text. So if you have maybe 1 or 2 or 3 characters of text, depending on the number of the route, you can have that, you know, auto size depending on the size of that text. You can either have it fixed or buffered. And with all of these, this goes with almost all the symbology in QGIS now. You can choose millimeters, points, meters at scale. So there's a lot of units you can use to specify the size of things. But
is there you have rotation there? Do we have a rotation that rotates to what we call it in SW world, convergence angle? I mean, geographic.
Oh, to me, so that to magnetic north or to.
Yeah, it's you can easily write, instead of angle, you can actually write a sort of a calculation of the convergence angle.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
projection north. Usually we use, but yeah, we use magnetic north.
Anytime you see a data defined override, then there's room to write an expression for that item. So yeah, I'm sure that could be figured out. I don't remember if there's a function for magnetic north or not.
No, I don't think so, but you can always calculate that data.
Right. Yeah, there's radians and things like that in there. So.
Yeah.
Have you used off topic? Have you used Slayer, Niall Dawson's Slayer?
Yeah, it works great.
Yes.
Yeah. In fact, I was one of the people who helped him. I had something like 7,000 MXDs that I fed to Niall Dawson so that he could test the functionality of that when he was building it. Yeah, it works quite well. And Slayer is in the development of that. It's an Esri compatibility suite plugin that allows you to import MXDs, Esri layer files, even SXDs like the Esri 3D tool, which I'm forgetting the name of, PMFs, all the different Esri file formats that are tied to ArcMap, you can import into QGIS. So it's really working quite well. SLYR. There's a, so basically he's done this plugin in his own time, in his own resources. So he has a community edition that has most of the functionality. And then if you want all the functionality, you have to pay a license fee for that until he has reimbursed himself for the time he put into it. And then it will all become free. That's kind of his model for this. But this is the community edition. And it allows you then, if you have an MXD, to, and I don't think I have any on this machine to show you, but if I had one, I could right click on an MXD in my browser panel and just import, right click and import that MXD, and QGIS brings it in with all the symbology and all the print layout settings as well. And so, yeah, it honors all of that. And that's been largely responsible, some of that development, for some of the improvements in the QGIS print composition window, like different scale bar styles and north arrow styles and things like that, so that there's an equivalent in QGIS for everything that exists in ArcMap, so that it will pull it in and have a compatible print layout in QGIS.
If you have, for instance, a representation, would it convert it to an SVG then?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I forgot about representations. I haven't.
I thought I asked Neil Dawson 3 weeks ago, and he said the representations works now if it's in override field, not an actual.
Interesting.
So you have to convert representation to an override, then it works. Because we are working a lot with representations because of the
Ease of use and smoothness to design complex markers, basically, and yeah, also symbolize one. So it's convenient when you sit in the history world, but just when you start to leave it, it gets. But you just need to be familiarize yourself with designing SVGs.
So the other thing about the Slayer plugin is it has a bunch of processing tools in the processing toolbox that you can use with it as well. So under MXD documents, there's tools for adding layers from an MXD to your project, so you can specify which layers from an MXD you just want to import, if you just want some with their symbology. Convert an MXD to a QGIS file, convert an MXD, add its data, and import it as a QGIS project in a geo package. Export document structure. I don't know what that does. This wasn't here the last time I looked, but ArcGIS Pro is there now as a category. So you can convert, looks like ArcGIS Pro style X into QGIS.
Yeah, he mentioned he would start for ArcGIS Pro projects.
Yeah.
And
so this
also,
really lowers the barrier for converting from the Esri environment into QGIS, because you can, every time I've tried to import a document in the last year, it's imported fine. Oh, there was a question there. I'm sorry. I missed that.
Oh, nothing. I kind of figure out why it's called Slayer.
I was joking.
Esri Slayer.
Yeah, a little humor there.
But he was mentioning something about able to read Esri annotation as well. I didn't remember what he said, but he was going there. That was one of his goals. I
There is
suppose
something. Yeah, there is something called annotations on your screen there.
Yeah. Convert annotation classes to geo package. Convert annotations.
Oh, I need to look at that.
I imagine that uses some of the same functionality he built into this extract labels tool. I'll bet it does something similar, but I don't know. Creates points with all the annotation details.
Matthew, we should buy Slayer so we can start working with it.
Yeah.
But even
We
the
should
free version
definitely
offers a
try
lot.
we should definitely get used to the community version so that we can discuss it with more knowledge there. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So let's see. I think I've shown you everything that's available in general in this annotations toolbar. So I don't know if there's any other questions related to that or other symbology or labeling questions.
I have a specific case I've been pondering back and forth quite a while, dealing with labeling aeronautical information. So I don't know if you saw the screenshot of that chart example. I don't know if you sent it to you or not.
Should I share something?
You know, and we have a kind of a complex labeling situation in an airspace polygon where we have, we need to bring it up on screen or something. Yeah, that one right there. So we draw this information, of course, to the data. So you have under is the name of this control, CTR control airspace, and then you have a call frequency, and then you have airspace class, and here comes the trouble, the D, and then you have the box vertical limits from ground up to 2,500 feet. So this is basically drawn from different attributes in the data in the polygon, and then the problem here is shifting from kind of a standard font to the D, and then combining it with the box 2.5. So that is not doable in Esri right now. So we had to have 3 text objects there. One for the first part, one for the second, one for the third. So ideally, of course, we want this just as a label on the fly.
And one.
Yes, one string, of course, but with this font property shifting, depending on where you draw the data from or however you choose to identify. So so I haven't figured out how to do this in either Esri or QGIS as one nice string. Of course, it will be probably a bit of a complex function or something, but you know, standard font manipulation, colors, and choose of font and size and so on, that's doable in one string. But having especially this backdrop of blue behind the transparent and white D, that's hard. But you could possibly do that with a geometry generator in QGIS, I think.
Yeah, I also wonder if your labeling expression had a case statement in it. You know, if this, then if that, then that you might be able to build it with a case statement. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a nice thing to think about with complex labels or a complex, you know, symbology of texts.
Yeah, that's tricky. That would be an interesting challenge.
Yeah, just as something that we kind of need to wrestle down in a good way. Should we shift platform?
Yeah, but let's see, so
we don't need to solve this right now, but that's just to illustrate that there's in some cases where we're not just you know, can use a simple labeling, and it goes for a city production, I think, Matthew, when you have a railway station icon and then some railway station texts and so on. So you kind of want to have that in a string, but that's more a case of an
yeah, I think it's similar kind of case. Yeah.
I don't really want to treat the airspace class as an icon or SVG. I want to, you know, just symbolize it as a label. But anyway, there's probably ways around that. That's a kind of the detail on detail challenges with this.
yeah.
That's just one little small example.
Yeah, I mean, I think aeronautical maps are some of the more complicated maps to put together from what I've seen. I've never had to work on one, but the symbology is quite complex.
Yeah, you basically have your ordinary topographic map, and you add airspace and vertical obstacle information and stuff like that. So it tend to get congested as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I suppose if we are going to continue hire you as a consultant, then we would have real data for you, maybe constructed through Slayer,
Mhm.
and dive in detail what we would like to, if we can't solve it ourselves.
Yeah, I would be happy to help where appropriate. Absolutely.
And I guess, but one thing you can show us now is how to, Henkan probably knows, but not me, how to, in the simple labels or annotation, to have halo on the texts.
Oh, yeah, actually quite simple. So this text object here, these are the labeling tabs for it. And so one of them is for a halo or a text buffer. So if you can see that I had a little white halo around that text. And so if I can check this box, I can increase the size of that halo, the color. And all those parameters are written. This includes blending modes. So there's a blending mode option here. So I can use a blending mode with just the halo itself. Doesn't seem to be working the way it normally would. I don't see it changing.
You've got to put it over some different things maybe to
Yeah, maybe.
see the effect of it. Move the text over half overlap.
There we go. I don't see it changing at all the way it normally would. I might have to see if that's a bug. But that's where you control the label halo there. So you can make it the same color as the background, in this case. So if we move it over another feature, you don't see the halo, but it makes the text more readable. And that's available for labels in general. So if I look at my layer that's being labeled here, right now, or this is the halo buffer section. So you can draw this text buffer around normal labels as well.
Does it include masking capabilities, specific colors or specific features?
Yeah, so there's this tab here. I don't have a lot of experience using this, so you might have to experiment with it, but there's this tab for masking. And so you can enable the mask, and this has to be set up. There's this masking tab here. And I think you have to set up which layers you want this to. I don't know enough to show you how it works, but that's where you find it. Is this masking function here. I think it's one of these features that is it seems like it wasn't set up as intuitively as it could have been.
Because in the S we can define specific layer in the line. If your line is black underground and then gray, you can define to just mask the black on that specific layer.
Yeah.
But
And I've
the
seen enough
difficulty-
demonstrations to know that that was the thinking behind this and that it is capable of doing that.
The issue with Esri is that you have to create polygons from the texts. So it's not on the fly. You have to actually create a polygon from text.
Here it's on the fly.
Yeah, so on the fly it's better.
Mm.
Yeah, it's used in some very fancy products where you have color select, and it's run by object, lots and lots of data in the EBS file in the outputs. So, but it's a kind of ancient technology now. Some products still use this color selective masking, and it's a good thing to have when you need it.
And there's also the layer effects so that you can add like an outer glow around features. So for example, if you expand the layer rendering section of layer styling for a layer, so this is my annotation layer, and I can turn on draw effects here. And then you have to click on this little yellow star and you get to this menu that has different effects. So I could put an outer glow around that polygon. Make it a little bigger so you can see a little white glow appearing around that gray rectangle. You can control the blur radius, the opacity of that. So make it a little more bold here so you can see it. And this also will allow you to use blending modes with that outer glow. All these effects have blending modes as possibilities. And then you can also use drop shadows. And so if you haven't used this, there's also this source. Source is the original styling of the feature. So if I turn that off, I'll just have the outer glow by itself with no feature. So sometimes that's interesting. There's also inner shadow and outer glow. And then there's even more down here. There's blur and colorize. For some reason, you get these source and then these four: inner glow, inner shadow, outer glow, and drop shadow. But there are more down here. So if I wanted to add one, I could highlight inner glow and choose blur, for example. And I could blur this polygon. And there's different blurring algorithms, and you can control the blur strength. So there's a lot of interesting little things like that buried in here that don't often have use cases, but there's actually thinking about rotation, there's also one in here for transform. And transform lets you flip these. It's kind of strange to do the annotation. I don't know why it's doing that. If I do it for a normal layer like forests, I think the effect would be.
You have to click.
Yeah. So you can do some strange things. So I'd have to turn off the source because the source is the original symbology and this is the transformed symbology. So there are occasionally use cases for this kind of thing. So yeah.
Cool, because we have a specific scenario with vertical obstacles in our production in defense. That means a circle, and it means an arm. That the arm tells us how tall the vertical obstacle is. But it's actually calculated also from the convergence angle we talked about before. The starting starts 0 at the top of and then the arm keeps moving. So we have to create the angle manually based on two. First magnetic north and then calculate the arm how tall it is.
Okay, yeah.
You can actually see it on one of the PNGs I sent you as well. And, probably in the this was just the next mail, but no, I send them there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's doable with the function in QGIS. You just have combined convergence triangle and function
I
of
think
the
it's better
height
because you
of
can
the height of the
combine
mast.
expressions.
Yeah, so S3 is not that flexible in doing expressions in a symbolized angle, but I think QGIS you can just write a function for it.
Yeah.
So I don't know how QGIS treats complex angles that is derived from two properties or more. But I think what I have seen in QGIS, you just have to start to dig into the functions.
Yeah, exactly.
So you say that the angle of the SVG should be this, that is fed from the function.
Yeah.
But Henkan,
I showed you that once. What? Say it again.
Oh, here I was just gonna show you. Well, by the way, I actually gave a talk this fall to the QGIS Swedish user group on new features in QGIS, and that's online. But there's also a couple new renderers that just came out with 3.2.4. There's this line burst featured layer type that lets you basically, I guess, I don't know how you can see this, but it's allows you to create it's like a shape burst fill, but for a line going across the line. So you can set it up between two colors or using a color ramp to create that. So that's kind of interesting. And then there is also interpolated line, which goes this is one that goes, oh no, not interpolated line. It's, I forget which one. Anyway, there's a lot of new symbology in QGIS too that has just come out. So this latest release 3.2.4 is pretty heavy with new cartographic features like that. So you should look at the change log when you have a chance.
I will.
Another thing, I don't know how much you know about it, but I don't know very much at all. It's when you have designed, done all this stuff, and you have your map layouts specified and established, and then you start to export maps. There's a couple of formats, I guess, that are standard. But how do you go from the layout and the symbolized data to, for instance, a PDF file? Well, how is this designed in QGIS? To go through an EPS file, or does it write a PDF directly? Or and also when you kind of want to export it as a raster, does it go through to a PDF and then rasterizes it, or do we know anything about how the whole export motor is designed? Because I don't know anything else.
So here I am in the print composition, and you can export as an image, as an SVG, or as a PDF. So if I export as PDF, I just choose my location, and then you have some options. You can always export as vectors. You can append the georeferenced information to make it kind of a geo-PDF. You can always export text as paths, or always export text as objects. So two settings there. You can choose a lossy or lossless compression. You can choose to create a geospatial PDF and choose which layers will be participating in that. So the user could toggle layers off and on in the PDF if you choose that option. And that will include map themes. So I've created those two map themes, no annotation in all layers. And so you could choose which map theme you're going to export. So there's quite a few options when generating a PDF.
Color space wise, it just inherits whatever you had defined your symbols as. It's SMIC or RGB or whatever.
Yeah, I believe it exports as RGB. I don't think it exports as CMYK. But
That's not a big deal nowadays anyway. But in some cases, we need to have alpha channels or overprints or something like a hillshade that is usually treated as an overprint, and then through blend modes, you take a raster from a PDF like that.
Mhm.
So it gets complex fairly quick when dealing with exporting high-level cartography maps.
Yeah.
I don't know much about it. I guess if you had something to say about that.
Yeah, and then of course there's the atlas in the print composition where you can generate atlases. And so that would be if I wanted the same map for every municipality, for example, and you set up the municipality layer as the coverage layer, and it would you can use expressions to change the title and position things on the map. And
no, it's data-driven pages and pages.
Exactly.
Ours
yeah.
Finally developed from before Esri had the data-driven pages with product instances and map series and so on. So we had some customization on the old Esri desktop. So the Atlas, I managed to set up a seamless georaster, customized tile size and so on, as we do now in QGIS with standard functionality in the Atlas. That was very nice. So kind of impressed that you just need to have a product instance layer and register it in the layout in Atlas, and then you have your product instances right there. Fairly easy to configure like that. Then of course there's more complex stuff. You have like a map angle on the chart frame, and then you need to kind of rotate it so you get a nice rectangle and so on. But then you still might want to have it as a geotiff, so you need to have the no data pixels there and so on. So there's some complex cases of exports or outputs that we need to consider as well when we start to go into this. But we are just starting this whole thing, and as I think we mentioned earlier, there's a high possibility that we might use Pro in some cases and QGIS in others.
Sure.
But we just don't know yet. So, but it looks promising with the whole annotations and so on. And a deal breaker will definitely be having text objects as real data objects in a Postgres. That will be necessary. So you actually carry data in that way, and also there will be performance issues if you don't. I don't know how SQLite would work in a multi-editing environment and QGIS files and so on. Many operators in London, for example, and you have 3 guys sitting and doing cartographic work. There's lots of stuff to consider, not just the cartography aspect or. So, but you just have to start somewhere, and as you move along, you are most certainly going to have customized development for addressing the issues.
Yeah, you would certainly want a Postgres database for that. You don't want to use project level things in QGIS or geopackages or SpatialLite for multi-level editing.
There are add-ons or solutions probably licensed that kind of replicates the multi-editing environment we have here on the old Esri stuff, where you pessimistically lock your database objects and so on. Check out an area and stuff and update the database. So I think there's technologies readily available, but still it's a big configuration issue and so on. But we have to start somewhere. As always.
You don't have any questions?
What about labeling and text and drawing order?
Drawing order of labels within a layer? Or could just
the labels always come on top of everything.
That's a good question. There is
some set index. Yes.
Yeah, there are some label placement weights. Where is that? There's these label priorities, and you can set obstacles as well for labeling. So there's some settings in here for the obstacle weight of that feature and its label, so that one layer's labels can be weighted higher than another layer's labels. And that's on this. It's on this placement tab. I'm sorry, I think I accidentally cut you off. You were saying something.
Well, sometimes the text should be underneath a line or something.
Yeah, I don't. It's from what my experience, the labels are always on top.
Yeah. So, but if you use a blend mode, it will appear to be underneath.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Because you don't want it to be on other objects, I guess, just the line itself.
Yep.
But it's fixed with annotation layer, so we don't need to use labels. So the annotation layers he showed you can put wherever we want in the drawing order. Right?
The annotation layer there you can drag in your draw order, so that's possible. But labels perhaps. But it doesn't really matter if you're doing a serious cartographic production. You're going to have data objects anyway, so you're going to have to treat it as annotation.
Do you ever use Illustrator or Inkscape to finish maps, or do you do it all in the GIS?
Matthew?
Yeah, Illustrator is what we use in the city maps almost always to finish edge tidying, obviously, but we usually have a "you are here" marker for that individual map, which is dependent on the actual sort of extract. So both that and sort of distance rings for showing this is a 5-minute walk or things like that. But we do quite a lot of things in Illustrator. We both sort of the manual editing like that, but also programming to get out some of these more advanced multi-symbol things, like the example that Jürgen sent with was a Paris example there with destination boxes. Those are sort of data driven, obviously, but then built using some code and then placed in after the map is exported to Illustrator and then edited in Illustrator. So we try to use the best of both worlds there.
And does any of your data have a temporal component?
Not other than that we have to import new sort of transit data every couple of weeks to bring in the latest bus services, for example. So whenever we do an output, we're taking the latest data that's available, and it's current for a couple of weeks, and then maybe the services change and stuff. So.
Yeah.
This has all been very useful. I think sort of plenty of things for us to think about and evaluate further, and also good to see roughly where things are with the development and how we might be able to affect the development and how we would do it in that case. So from my point of view, it's been very useful. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to you for setting it all up.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's always fun to talk about new features and cartography.
Good stuff.
Yeah, and we will show some use cases. But,
So
Henrik,
yeah, I will. I'll send you the recording when we're finished, so everyone can access that.
thank
That's
you.
great.
But Henrik, do you have some questions?
No, not really. I have a lot of things to test, I would say, from the newest version. I haven't had 2.24 that long, so I will see some stuff. I like the that you can have two geometry columns in PostGIS and use them both, which is really not like Esri. Because in PostGIS you can always have several geometries on a single object. So, and now QGIS supports using them also. So you can have a point and a line.
So Esri, how does Esri support for the PostGIS annotations? I guess it works pretty well.
Yeah, but it's a linked thing. And in PostGIS you can have two geometries on the same object,
Right.
not linked, but in the same object actually.
Right.
And now I saw something that QGIS supports it now. I can use it. So.
Well, I'm glad you were with us.
Yes. Thanks so much for having me, and I'll send the recording and have a good weekend.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Very, very good. And have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
Excellent.
Bye.
Bye.